Thank you very much for joining this webinar. This is a webinar of the BCS North and Central London branches, and you're very welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. This evening, we've got a subject which you can see on screen there, and it's about IT for good, help the world. And that is, of course, a call to action for you, but we've been doing a few things about it in the past. However, you can see the advertisement on the screen there, and there are some of the things that we want to say about this event. The main thing is that we did a number of events, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And then I will introduce Ben Coombs as well. But first of all, what I should say is my name is Dalim. I'm chairman of BCS North and Central London branches. And this is a webinar which we are doing using GoToWebinar, by the way. And that is a webinar where I'm accompanied by my BCS Central London branch colleague, David Grundy, also with David Nyatu, who is from BCS London facilities, and naturally by Ben Coombs. Now, on screen there, you probably read the information about Ben. I'm going to go now to my next screen. And as I move us forward, please think through the webinar about how you can help move us forward, because there are lots of opportunities for IT folks in the world ahead. Now, this is something about Ben. And Ben is at PwC, as you know, and there you can read something about him. He's also got a very definite interest in sustainability and climate change. These are topics that we hope to share with you much more through the year as we go forward. Now, you can read about some of Ben's great interests there, and also that he's an advisor to the UK's net zero team, and so on. So lots of great things there. And I'm hoping that Ben will tell us much more about the sustainability goals and net zero and so on during this webinar. So I've got an agenda today of about 12 minutes of me giving you an introduction, then over to Ben for his talk, and then we have questions and answers. So please do enter questions in the box you can see, which is either chat or questions. Preferably, questions should be entered into the questions box. And our colleague David will pick these up and will ask those questions to Ben at the end of his talk. So we're looking forward to some great questions from you at the end. Let's go to the next slide, because I want to tell you about some of the things that we've been doing in BCS North London and Central London branches. Now, I've been running a whole series of events initially, and then webinars entitled something along the lines of Disruptive Technologies, the Future, and You, and various variations of that. And I've done that at a number of places, both in the UK and in Europe. And you can see a video or maybe a couple of videos by going to those links that you see on screen there. So that's some of the stuff that I've been doing in the past. You can see some details of my background there as well, but this is not a webinar about me, of course. So let's move on. The future, oh my God. Well, my theme was that the future was very scary and unfamiliar, as on the left, but it's gradually becoming much more familiar as on the right. We tend to associate the future, we tended to associate the future with robots and so on, but of course, it's a much, much richer future, and much more is happening than just robotics. Here are some of the events that we've run in the past to do with autonomous vehicles, for example, to do with drones and the problems relating to that, and to do with the future of mobility in terms of 5G and IoT and numerous other things like that. And as you can see in the drones quarter there, it's not just good news. There are lots of other risks and hurdles that we need to overcome as well. Lots of predictions for the future, and I've scanned through a number of those during these sessions. This is one from Forrester with their predictions 2020. 2020, doesn't that seem like a long time ago? But I think it's a year we'll always remember, isn't it? And there are some of the predictions that Forrester made for 2020, some of which are correct, some of which we could discuss. Likewise, looking at it from a much more data-centric view, here's NTT Data's view of some of the digital trends that were coming up. And digital trends, because what we are in, of course, is a period of digital transformation and how that has accelerated. But there are some of the predictions from NTT Data about information society trends and also pure technology trends. Lots of different topics there. But also, we very much focused on this report of the World Economic Forum, talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And you'll know what that is, of course, by now. Or if you don't, then maybe Ben will just say a sentence or two about the fourth industrial revolution and what it means. Is it just huge heaps of rubble with big cities in the background, or is there more? Well, of course, there's more. There were 17 global goals identified that we need to address during this decade, weren't there? Number one is poverty, as you can see up there, poverty alleviation. But there are lots more, and Ben will go through some aspects of these during our session today. There were 17 goals identified by the United Nations, by the World Economic Forum. And the amazing thing to me, and possibly to you as well, was that 10 of the 17 big global goals were related to technology, and technology can help substantially in those areas. Again, more from Ben will follow on this, but what I noted was that progress to reach the UN global goals for sustainable development by 2030 is not on track. Now, this report was produced in January 2020, so I'm looking forward to hearing from Ben about how things have advanced during the year. We're 1 year on from there now. Down at the bottom, you can see some of the big trends like big data and AI and blockchain and so on. I wonder where we're up to with those. We'll hear more from Ben about that. Then, if we move on from there, if I can, my screen seized again, there are the goals and there are the core technologies which were considered in that report about the SDGs and how we can unlock technology for them. So this too was something that I majored on quite a lot. And this is going to be part of the subject of today's talk. So what else can I say? We had a few upsets during the year, didn't we? Our year of disruption and disruptive technologies was very much disrupted because whilst we were trying to unlock technology for the global goals, a certain natural phenomenon, or we can discuss how natural it was, COVID impacted our world. And boy, did it cause a huge disruption for us. So where are we up to in terms of technology for the global goals? I'd like to hand you over now to Ben to tell us much more about this. And remember, put your questions into the Q&A, into the questions panel, and we'll deal with those when we end. Thank you very much, and over to you, Ben.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Dalim, and it's a very good introduction. And I think I'd like to touch on some of those themes. Shall I turn my webcam off or leave it on? I don't mind either way. And obviously we've got the presentation, so I will move this to the bottom.
Sure,
Okay.
leave it on there.
Leave it on, great. Okay, so what I wanted to do, and thank you for the introduction, and Dalim has shown my sort of profile there, so it gives you an idea that, you know, I've been working on climate change for the last 15 years. I got into sustainable innovation about 5 years ago now, because I felt that the traditional policy and market responses were not enough to get us to where we needed to get to. And when I joined PwC just over 4 years ago, I've co-founded a practice with a partner, Celine Havaya, around innovation and sustainability, because we felt it was a missing sort of area that the firm needed to focus on. So we have, over the period of the last 4 years, been developing a range of reports with a range of clients. We've been working with CDKN, a development organization, with the World Economic Forum. We've done a number of reports. We've done our own publications, and we've also been working with Microsoft, looking at how do you harness those technologies that Dalim showed to really advance the environment, and more broadly, we started with the environment, and that has broadened out to other environmental challenges, and then on to the global goals, because we felt that some of these, there are lots of nexuses, the water energy nexus, and then there are other ones as well where you feel that it only works. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this to work. Okay, it only works if you tackle them together. So we noted a year ago that the global goals are not on track, and these numbers have probably got a lot worse, by the way, because of COVID. But we've got more than a third of employed workers live on less than $1.90 a day. 2/3 of undernourished people worldwide live in sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia. We've got issues of affordable and clean energy, life below water. I mean, you can read the numbers, but all of what this all adds up to is us really saying that, look, a number of these SDGs, which were set in 2015, so we're almost a third of the way through the time period to 2030. Well, we are a third of the way through the time period to 2030. You know, we're way off track, and unfortunately, COVID, as we show in a subsequent report in September and this January, has really knocked these off track in many ways. So we, as a firm, have been looking at the technologies that can really make an impact commercially. So these are the 8 technologies that could have the biggest impact now. This was written in 2016, by the way. So we looked at 250 technologies and said, look, these are the 8 that really matter at scalable level. So artificial intelligence, augmented and virtual reality, blockchain, drones, Internet of Things, robotics, and unfortunately for me, I've got the thing, and 3D printing. Sorry, the thing was in front of my screen. So what we did is we said, well, hang on a second, if you've got these technologies and you've got these global goals, why don't we do a landscape analysis and see which of these technologies could really help us towards the global goals. So we had a use case database of many of these technologies. We obviously had the global goals, and we started to look at, you know, how the fourth industrial revolution, and for those of you who don't know the fourth industrial revolution, it's the revolution that's started in about 2015, 2016, which is a culmination of technologies bursting onto the scene, which include those technologies I've just shown you. So artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, which is a network of sensors linked in by cloud, and blockchain, which I can come on to discuss if people are interested to discuss blockchain and try and give you some examples. But essentially, blockchain is a way to transmit data in a trusted and secure way. So how can we use these technologies, including drones and 3D printing, to really advance the global goals? You know, we see we're off track, but what are the barriers and risks to scaling that, and how do you create the right enabling environment to achieve those goals? So as Dalim just showed, we found that 10 of the 17 global goals, technology could have a high impact. I think it's really interesting to focus on where the applications are happening right now. And what you really see is that advanced technology is being used in areas with big commercial returns. So, you know, healthcare, we all know healthcare and pharmaceuticals globally is a massive industry with, you know, decent economic and financial returns for those companies. Oh, guess what? We're seeing a lot of technology into healthcare, affordable and clean energy. Well, over the last 5 years, we all know what's happened with solar prices and photovoltaic cells and wind turbines. And we're now seeing a lot of technology flowing in to those, and a lot of, you know, AI and other technologies, advanced materials obviously flowing in there. Industry innovation and infrastructure, we know many of the big conglomerates and multinationals are investing heavily in 3D printing, smart buildings, smart cities, which is the number 11 as well. So that combination of things, I think what you could say of SDG 3, 7, 9 and 11 is they're all SDGs where there's at least a reasonable degree or a large degree of commercial return, and that's where we're seeing the action. Now, with the lowest number of applications are the ones where there are bigger sort of social externalities and where we see, you know, less, perhaps at the moment, you know, private interest. So poverty, gender equality, life below water and life on land. So one of the things we tasked ourselves with was saying, well, look, some of these applications that are in healthcare and energy and the other, you know, sort of like highest number of applications, surely some of these applications might be able to be used for some of the things on the right-hand side of that chart. So that's something that I'll come on to talk about, because I do think that what we're seeing is, you know, a rapid explosion in innovation and use cases and examples. And it's really important to understand where they're being used and how they can be used. So, I mean, the bottom line, I think Dalim went into as well, but, you know, big data platforms are crucial here. AI is crucial, blockchain and IoT. So AI, blockchain and the Internet of Things are often called the gearbox of the fourth industrial revolution, because they're sort of the ghost layer that operates behind everything. You need the Internet of Things, sensors and satellites to collect data. Blockchain is a way of transferring data and value, and AI is a process to optimize systems. So, you know, you often see a combination of those technologies working together, or one or two. Obviously, in terms of the global goals, advanced materials play a big role as well. So, yeah, that's important too. So we, for this work, mapped more than 300 fourth industrial revolution applications to the global goals. Just to give you some examples, you know, blockchain digital identity solutions to enable economic identities, including for refugees in SDG 1, SDG 2, you know, highly customized 3D printed food and other materials. SDG 3, AI and sensor-enabled remote monitoring and diagnostics for hard-to-reach communities. SDG 4, natural language processing enabling voice assistance and speech to text for inclusive learning support. SDG 5, AI to identify unbiased selection to support inclusivity. And then in 6, with water, decentralized water systems with smart contract enabled peer-to-peer water rights trading and dynamic pricing, which is probably a combination of blockchain, sensors, and AI. So, as I mentioned, a lot of these examples we're seeing are in more in the healthcare. Diagnosis and treatment of skin cancer is an important area. Around 70% of cancer deaths occur in low and middle income countries. There are ways you can use a smartphone to take a photo of a mole and, you know, detect skin cancer from images. You've probably heard about this in the press. I myself have a reasonable amount of moles and go get them checked out, and I've noticed that this is coming in with, you know, cameras taking pictures rather than a dermatologist looking at skin lesions. So what we've seen is we've identified more than 10 applications in use for CNN for, you know, convolutional neural networks for diagnosis, and then you can check for, you know, psoriasis and other diseases. But the important thing is that this technology can also be used in, you know, identifying crop disease, you know, increasing food security and enabling more sustainable agricultural practices. So what I was saying earlier is it's important to think about these technologies, and it's not just about creating new technologies, it's also about making sure that the technologies are spread so that you know, they're spread, and so that you can really understand how they might be used in other of the global goals. So what we're not saying in this report is you need brand new technology for those hard to reach global goals. It's quite a lot about technology transfer from those areas that have really made rapid progress to other areas. One other area we found was that yeah, more than 5% of applications identified rely on voice recognition technology. And so, you know, digital assistance, advanced security, real-time translation, efficient transport and disability support. So voice or speaker recognition relies on machine learning to receive and interpret dictation. And the accuracy of voice recognition differs according to gender and dialect. So it's 13% more accurate for men in certain dialects, such as Indian English. And certain dialects have only a 78% accuracy rate. So this bias exists in the way that computer sciences have collected, prepared, and programmed data. As you know, like with any models or systems, whatever you put in is going to be the sort of base data. So training data really matters. So social injustice is a real issue here. And like, how do we make sure we get the gender equality goal 5 and reduced inequalities goal 10? So, but also, you know, using voice recognition technology has significant potential to advance global goals in, you know, healthcare and education and other areas. So it's about that balance. But again, you know, it's about understanding these technologies and how they might work in terms of the global goals. So what are the barriers here? So we have a model framework at PwC called the sort of people, process, technology, and data. And so in the people box, you know, we've got unequal skills and capacity distribution and insufficient collaboration. Just touching on the first one, you know, we've got lots of people working on areas like healthcare, as I mentioned, and many fewer on poverty. And there's a capacity distribution issue as well between countries and across countries, and within countries sometimes as well. And insufficient collaboration, and that's the point I was making about, are the people who are working with this sort of visionary technology really sharing how they're working and you know, collaborating in a way that can really help advance? Are there ways in which some of the people working on you know, sort of the cancer detection, the voice recognition could really help to advance a broader suite of global goals? Process, interdisciplinary working is challenging. I'm an economist by background. I've been working on tech for 5 years. I think in any area, I worked on policy as well for 10 years. It's kind of like, it does take a while to work out the language and stance and the way people operate. And unfortunately, with global goals and net zero and so many of the challenges we've got, we haven't got 10 years to learn how each other thinks about things. So we do need to think about, how do we break down silos? How do we create clear and consistent language? And I do think that's one of the things about the Sustainable Development Goals, that they have their problems. You know, there are probably too many targets. Maybe there are too many goals, or the goals could have been folded up into 3 or 4 key areas that, you know. But the good news is, you know, I can go and give a talk or you know, have a conversation about any of these goals around the world, and it's a consistent language. So that is a real start there. But then, do the individual country regulatory frameworks keep up with what we need, and is there enough investment in the process of what we're trying to achieve? With technology, there's a wide variation in maturing of emerging technologies. I mean, I think there is a variation of emerging tech, but I think it's now about how that emerging tech is used and how it is deployed, not just about the technology itself. It's like there's a variation in the maturity of the types of applications. There's insufficient infrastructure in many instances. I mean, I think we've seen through COVID, the digital divide is getting wider. And that really is an issue as we look to, if we are going to use technology, are we just going to, you know, tilt the balance in favor of the people who have the digital tools and the digital skills? And there's a lack of relevance to certain contexts that, yeah, people haven't been using the technology in the types of contexts that we're talking about, and is there some sort of upskilling and reskilling needed there. On data, you know, there's limited data volume quality in many of these areas, particularly the environment, analysis and interoperability. You know, this isn't the same as some of the data that people are used to in commercial areas, and how, you know, this is very different in some of the areas that we're talking about. So that was January, and Dalim said, you know, what's happened since then? Well, in September we launched. So, you know, off the back of that, we said, look, this is all very interesting. We did put a call to action into that, but then last January, but then we started talking to some of the corporate members of the World Economic Forum and saying, you know, what is that framework for action for corporate? So we really saw leadership as a key area in how do you harness technology for the global goals. So we created a framework that seeks to support that corporate leadership and provide a sort of guiding framework outlining the critical conversations that must occur in companies before technological advancements can effectively deliver progress towards the global goals. And, you know, the good news is lots of companies feel they have that purpose and responsibility to do that. And we identified 8 key topic areas and a set of questions to guide those conversations. So, you know, this was trying to say, look, you're a CEO or you're a leadership team in any company in the world, how do you make sure that, and you've said to yourself, yeah, look, we get it. We get the technology piece, or we're a technology firm, or we're a digitally native firm. We understand technology. We would really like to deploy this to support the global goals. Well, you know, have you got a commitment? Have you set a commitment to harness technology so that everyone knows across your organization, internally and externally, that you're committed to this? And then have you considered how you can do that to drive positive global goals? So have you looked at your strategy and operating model integration? Have you set the strategy and then have you integrated it into your operating model? And then obviously you need to make sure that you've got a senior management team that's accountable for delivering on that so that they deliver the global goals. On products and services, then you need to think about how do you make sure that sustainable technology and the global goals are implemented and embedded into that products and service strategy, so that not only within your operations and what you're doing in all of the goods and services that you're sending out, that those have this in mind too. So you need to also think about corporate R&D efforts, research and innovation, and, you know, are you essentially putting enough time, effort, investment to solving some of those big societal challenges? And then you need to make sure you've got the right skills to support policymakers on that technology developments and to help support successful policy action. Policy engagement is key. It's not only about what you're doing as a company, it's about what you're talking to government and policy makers and regulators about. How do you develop those policies to harness technology? What are the barriers? What are the things that need to happen? How do you create that level playing field? So the final one is, you know, a really important one here as well when we talk about multidisciplinary partnerships, because we're more and more aware that these goals don't just solve themselves in terms of, you know, they really require people to look at them closely and to make sure that they're doing the right things in a logical and clear way, and we need multidisciplinary insights to help that happen. So what does that lead me to conclude? Well, the power of pervasiveness and impact of new technologies placed as a critical juncture, and there's a pressing need to steer their use in a responsible way, and we can come on to talk about some of the other sort of downside risks of tech if you would like. The new reality of COVID and reliance on tech has magnified this further. I think we've really seen, as we all sit in front of our screens at home, no doubt, you know, how technology has had such an important role in 2020 and obviously beyond. You know, as leaders, I mean, we're definitely still in the rescue phase of all of this. I wouldn't suggest we're not. I mean, but hopefully in 6 to 9 to 12 months time, the rescue phase will move into recovery phase. And as we look at economic and business models to address climate change, pandemics, inequalities, social exclusion, the role of technology needs to be assertively directed. It can't just be left to sort of, you need to work out what are you trying to achieve. There are huge opportunities, growing risks, and there are lots of trade-offs as well. And I do think there are trade-offs between some of these global goals. We obviously need to explore and exploit all the win-wins, but there are going to be things that we might need to prioritize over others, or at least determine the sequencing of how we tackle them. So, we feel it's time for leaders to step up, to direct technology and innovation to tackle society's toughest challenges. The other thing I would say is yesterday, which I haven't had a chance to put into the slides, we did launch a government framework. So if you look up the corporate framework, I can perhaps, is there a chat? Oh, sorry, I might stop sharing my screen now just so I can see people, and we can come back to that. But so that we released a government framework to say what should government and the public sector be doing, because obviously it's not just about corporates, it's about both sides of the coin. So that came out yesterday, so that's nearly a year to the day, I think, since the original report. And I think that's an interesting area where we talk about setting ambition again, but the importance of getting the right policy in place, the right leadership and the right accountability, and how do governments work both within government and across government. So please do check that out if you're interested in this area, particularly if you have links to the public sector. I've whistled through that reasonably quickly because I think I always find with these things, you can go and read the report, but if you've got burning questions, I'd rather hear those and have a bit of a discussion around the topics rather than just what's written in the report. So Dalim, do you want to
Hi Ben, thanks a lot for that. So I've got a list of questions for us to go through initially, and then we will move on to the audience questions. So please do type your questions into the question box. So the first question is, has COVID-19 reshaped any of your thinking on your approach to technology?
No, that's a good question. I think I heard one of the big supermarket retailers say that it had accelerated the transformation from bricks to mortar to online retail by five years in 9 months. And I think one thing that's been really interesting is just how much digital upskilling has gone on. We're all used to using these webinar things now. We've used a variety of platforms over the course of the past year, and I think that seeing how pervasive technology can be. Having said that, the flip side of that is, because I've got a friend of mine who works on the UN negotiations. So COP26 was supposed to be in Glasgow last November. It's going to be in Glasgow this November, hopefully. Was saying that it's very difficult for some of the people. She represents the small island states. They don't all have Wi-Fi and all of these tools, and there is a need for people to come together. So we must be very aware of the digital divide, particularly in terms of the global goals and what technology firms and corporates and governments can do to support the rollout of technology in a way. And we're seeing that in the UK at the moment in education, I think, as well, like that digital divide of online lessons and some people not having computers and laptops or enough space. I mean, it's all very well saying, well, here are 4 laptops. If you've got 4 people in the same room, they can't all be doing a lesson at the same time. Well, maybe on headphones, but it all gets very difficult in terms of space and digital connectivity. So I think a lot of issues are raised. I think we need to work through them all, but I think it's shown the power and pervasiveness of technology, as well as some of the challenges and the downsides.
Okay, great. The next question is, what are the biggest challenges to upskilling and reskilling?
So these are 2 really, really big areas. So upskilling is taking someone who's got some digital skills and making those better, and reskilling is taking someone who doesn't necessarily have those skills and making sure they've got them. I think that there are a lot of challenges in terms of tone. I think we all saw the government's advert on the ballerina becoming a cyber expert and the derision that got. I think, I agree with why everyone thought that was not a good advert, but I get the idea that what the government is saying is that, look, as the economy changes, as the structure of the economy changes, we are going to need people to get different skills. I think this probably starts in school education, probably explaining to children that I don't think we've been very good at explaining to children that the future will be different than the past. And that as technology evolves, we will need to learn different skills, and the types of roles we have will be different. Essentially, we've got a school curriculum that was, set up in the 18th century, and it's been running for 300 years, and it's kind of like, well, we're now in the 21st century, and we might need to look at that and what we're teaching people. Because really, for me, education is thinking to lead out, obviously, in terms of Latin, but it's teaching people how to think, how to tackle challenges, problem solving, conceptual thinking, those types of things. And I think we need to perhaps explain to children in both school and university what types of skills they're learning and why they're learning them, rather than saying you're learning these skills and you're going to be able to use them for that problem. It's you're learning these skills and you're going to be able to use them for multiple problems. I'm not going to get into whether we should teach coding or not, or whether it's going to become defunct, but I think, again, it just goes back to that idea of teaching broad brush skills that can then be focused in on certain areas, rather than saying you've only got this set of skills. We've got to get flexibility and agility into the system, and that includes both at the school and university level and in the lifelong learning, online learning in the workplace. And we've got to get people used to the fact that it's not you finished your degree when you were 22 or 23 and you're done. It's very much that's the start of lifelong learning.
Okay, the next question is, how do we develop the right data and tools?
It's a very big question, this, I think. The data is a particularly interesting one about some of these areas where, for example, if you take kind of food data and where food is, or you take agricultural data, it's very interesting about who owns the data, privacy rights, should data be public. So I think there are lots of issues around data and ownership that need to be thought through. But I do think the government and public sector need to get on the front foot on some of these issues, and think about where data is held, what purposes it's serving, who has access to it. Is there a way to anonymize data in a way that can give people proper data sets that they can analyze and come up with insights for? So I think there are some interesting questions there. On tools, there's clearly a level of investment required here for companies and governments alike to make sure that we've got the right digital skills to have a workforce that's fit for the 21st century.
Okay, thanks. The next question is, looking ahead, what is likely to cause the biggest disruptions from technology on the basis of when, not if?
Oh, good question. I think that, yes, I'm trying to think of the best way how to answer this one. I think the biggest disruptions are coming to sectors that have not been disrupted already. So we've seen a lot of disruption from technology to the music industry, through Spotify and iTunes and others. We've seen, pretty big disruption to the television and that type of market, in terms of, Netflix and those types of players coming in. So what I would say is we're probably going to likely see the biggest disruption in sectors that haven't yet been radically disrupted. So I think that includes supermarkets, which are already being disrupted, obviously, because of COVID, but I think that was coming anyway. I think you've then got to look at education and healthcare. And I think both education and healthcare have been, rather reluctant to, try to get a phone appointment with your GP before 2019 in the UK was not easy. Or to be able to send a picture of an issue, let's just say you've got something on your face that you want to send a picture, that they'll be, oh, no, data privacy. And now that seems much more open to how these things are operating. Whether they're fully safe and got the right controls in place, I'm not sure. I don't want to comment, but I do think COVID-19 has, and I am one of those people who believe that we will, well, I think we could be in a massive period of productivity gains, because we've unlocked some of the areas that everyone said was impossible to improve productivity. And so I think education and healthcare are two sectors to watch very closely, because I don't think they're going to come out of the 2020s the way they went in.
Okay, the next question is, what is the approach to prevent silo behaviors across company domains?
So silo behaviors, I think it goes a bit back to my, when you were at school or university, I introduced you and I said I'm an economist. Well, in some ways that's helpful, in some ways it's not. I think knowing I'm an economist probably tells you it's something about the framing of how I think, or how I was originally taught to think. But we must be flexible to work with people from multiple disciplines, and I think we've got to be open to new ideas, and we've also got to be open to the limitation of our fields. All of our fields have limitations, and we need to acknowledge those limitations and be honest about those. So I do think it's important to break down barriers, get stuck in. Don't say to yourself, oh well, I don't, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't understand this. I mean, that's, to be honest, that's one good thing about coming to PwC. It's very sort of collaborative, and you are expected to muck in on all aspects of projects, from contracting through to from sales through to contracting through to delivery, through to giving talks about things. And I do think that encourages people to be a bit more all-rounders rather than just focused in on one area. So I do think being brave and getting stuck into things, it's not enough now just to say I'm going to do this for 40 or 50 years and that's it. You're going to probably have to work, I've had to work on climate science in my career. I managed a bunch of very senior scientists on a project who were doing some climate science. You just got to be flexible to the types of things that are going on and see whether you can bring your insight and skills and learn off others,
Okay, the next question is, what is the role of governments in creating agile enabling environments?
Yes, I think this is crucial. I mean, there's a danger at the moment, and I think we're seeing it, that, I think the situation in the US is interesting in that respect, that, unless you get ahead of the curve on some of these technologies and applications and the use cases, you're going to be playing catch up. And I think the reason it's important for governments to be agile is to be ahead of what might happen in 5 years' time, and make sure that the pace of technology, which is very difficult, but it does mean that you've got to kind of think 2 steps ahead and make sure that you're planning for ideas that really matter in the medium term. There's this idea of regulatory sandboxes where you get people together and discuss the type of regulation that you might need and how it might need to evolve, or a loosening of regulation, and try that out for a while in a small area and see how it works, so you can kind of see in a safe way how that works before rolling it out to a broader part of the economy.
Okay, so the final question before we move on to the audience questions is, what can companies do to ensure technology is used to accelerate progress to the global goals?
Yes, I think that question probably was written before we had that corporate framework, but I think that corporate framework really tries to set out what leadership is. It does need to come from the top, just to say. I think it does need to be the CEO, CFO, someone at some senior leader that says, no, we use technology in a big way, and we're going to make sure not only do we harness that for our customers, but we make sure that that gets harnessed for the global goals, and we're going to track that, and all of the things I mentioned in my brief talk about what the areas that you need to focus on.
Okay, so moving on to the audience questions now, so please continue to send us your questions. The first question is from Philip, and he wants to know, how necessary is blockchain for typical goals use cases, and do you have any examples of how it can be used?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think blockchain at the moment, just to say, isn't a massively distributed technology, but I think it will become so. And the reason is that when I became convinced about blockchain in terms of transactions, it's because it's cheaper, faster, and more secure, and that's why I think it will win out over other technologies. You need to be exchanging something of value. So where it works well, I think the energy distributed grid system is a good example. So LO3 in New York have got a microgrid where people can the thing about smart contracts on blockchain is that you can sort of set a price that you're willing to sell. So you could be in Brooklyn and have solar power and say, well, look, I'm only willing to sell solar power to the grid for, you know, whatever, I'm just making, you know, X cents per kilowatt hour. And so the blockchain will only commit that contract when that price goes above that or below that. And that's really powerful in terms of people having control over what they're selling to the grid, or feeling that they're in control of their buying and selling, that's done in an automatic way. Another example, which I think is really interesting, I think it was IBM who are working on this, is an idea of disaster response. So with smart contracts on a blockchain, you can say, like on an island, we commit, if there is a hurricane, we commit to provide, you know, 500 tents or 400 meal pouches to these locations. And then when the hurricane or disaster hits, the blockchain with AI, so AI can then talk to the blockchain and say, we need this here, there, or somewhere else, in location A, B, and C. The smart contract can trigger that and start releasing those goods to be you know, activate the contract, which then gets obviously the people who own those goods to then deliver them to the places that they need. So I think in terms of a store of value, I mean, some of the Japanese voting, local voting is on the blockchain, just in terms of security and transparency. I certainly think in terms of voting systems are going to go that way. I think the land registry is moving on to the blockchain. I'm not sure whether it's by 2025, but I think it's in the next 5 years. So I personally think the blockchain is one of those things where, yeah, distributed ledger technologies are going to be massive, but you may not hear about them that much. And a lot of those blockchains are going to be private blockchains. So as I say, like a land registry one, where it's an internal one rather than necessarily fully public. So although Bitcoin is probably the most known example of blockchain technology, which has big energy use implications, which, you know, we can go into if others are interested, I think you're more likely to see private blockchains in the same way that you saw the intranet before you saw the internet.
Okay, yeah, we do have a question on that, but I'll just do a different question first. So this question is from Thierry. Can you give us some concrete examples of how some companies and organizations have implemented your guidelines and framework and the impact they have made?
Good question. Where's the impact analysis? Yeah, I mean, we haven't really done that work yet. As I said, the corporate framework we released in September, and the government one we've released now, I think that's probably a follow-up project to really go around and say how people are implementing those. I mean, we've had good feedback that they've been useful, but in terms of case studies, I couldn't give you them off the top of my head. In terms of the 2030 vision platform that WEF operates, I think some of those members have definitely contributed to the reports. Some of the governments have contributed to the government report, and the good news is in the government report that's out yesterday, we have got some case studies from countries that are using some of this thinking to progress their situation.
Okay, the next question is from Nicola. Who is going to lead the leaders on a global level?
Of sort of technology, or technology for good? I mean, I think in terms of technology, I think, you know, China and the US are the two in the lead, certainly for AI. I think with other technologies, you know, we will see. You know, advanced materials, could the UK have a role? I think yes. I think there's, you know, we were the graphene, the home of graphene. So, you know, you would hope that we can stay ahead of the game in some of those areas. And we've seen with sort of pharmaceuticals that we're still very near the top of the pecking order there. So I think it's going to be different technologies are going to have different rates of growth. I think one of the ones that seems to have sort of slipped off the radar recently is 3D printing and what's going to happen with 3D printing, because I think that's a big area that is likely to have a really big impact. So that's one to watch, definitely. But in terms of modular buildings and being able to build things quickly and in a versatile way, particularly if we end up with a situation of, you know, further pandemics, and, you know, being able to create and put things away quickly is going to be a real advantage.
Okay, the next question is from Gordon. As a sovereign monetary provider, is there any feedback from government on paying for climate change?
So I think a few things. I think that the narrative. So I've been working on climate change for 15 years. When I first started on climate change, the narrative was very much of cost. It was very much a sort of cost narrative of this is going to cost you 1 to 5% of GDP. But the good news is that's going to save you damage of 5 to 20% of GDP. So therefore, it's worth it, which was kind of the Stern Review of 2006. I think in the 2010s, we finally, and I was part of the team that worked on the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, the new climate economy report, which said, you can have better growth and better climate. And I think it's taken the last decade, but I think people are starting to realize that the growth in sort of clean tech and climate tech can lead us to better outcomes. And while it might need some investment, it doesn't necessarily need more investment than other areas such as fossil fuels. So while I think climate needs investment, I do think there is a realization from governments now that this can be self-sustaining once you prime the system. And also, as you look in a post-COVID world, next year, probably now, obviously, well, COVID-19 is going to be with us forever, but I mean, in terms of its huge impact, I think in the West, it will, probably be this year, unless it mutates. We are going to be looking at, how do you collect taxes? You probably want to be taxing bads. Carbon's a relatively easy thing to tax, and can you create revenue and create jobs and growth by shifting people into low carbon sectors? So while it is a sort of government spending money story, there is some of that, particularly in the R&D phases and those types of things. I do think it's quite a lot about enabling environments and getting the right incentives. So for example, in the UK, to say we are not going to have internal combustion engine vehicles after 2030 doesn't really cost the government that much money. But it sends a really, really strong signal to all of the manufacturers in the UK and in Europe and beyond that, we are expecting, that sends a clear, credible signal that we are expecting light vehicles to be able to be electric by that time period, and those will be the only ones that will be able to sell. So it's not always about money. It's about a combination of factors, as well as some R&D investment.
Okay, the next question is from Janice. What do you say to those who maintain blockchain is unnecessary, expensive, and a huge drain on electric power? And I think I read a few days ago that Bitcoin uses more energy than Switzerland. I'm not sure how true that is.
Yeah, I think that is true, but I don't think Bitcoin is the only example of blockchain. So firstly, Bitcoin is a reasonably public blockchain, so anyone can use it. Interestingly, I was in Amsterdam just over 2 years ago, and I met the guy who first came up with that assessment, and he worked for PwC in the Netherlands, a guy called Alex de Vries. And if you see different countries being quoted, because this was a question I asked him, it's because it actually tracks the energy use of Bitcoin on a daily basis. So he's got a tracker, and some days it's Switzerland, some days it's Austria, some days it's Denmark, just depending on how much is being used. Look, Bitcoin was set up 11 years ago in 2010, or 10 years, just over 10 years ago. It's just had its 10th anniversary on technology that would not be advisable today, in terms of every single transaction on a Bitcoin has to be approved by every single user on the network, every node on the network. So as it's grown to millions of users and hundreds of millions of users perhaps, every single node needs to verify every transaction, which is not an efficient way of verifying transactions on a network. So when I talk about private blockchains, that's what I mean. Like, you can have proof of stake, so you can have, like if Walmart had a blockchain for its supply chain, they could verify things, or you can. So there are various other ways you can do that without having it use loads of energy. And the other thing I've heard, but I've never seen the stats, is you've got to look at the energy use of what it's replacing. If you looked at the energy use of the global financial system, what would that be? So I don't think we should carry on with the Bitcoin way of using energy. There are much lower ways to use energy in terms of sort of the blockchain proofs of the last few years, and I think that the incentive to do that, you know, quickly and cheaply is there. It is unnecessary in some instances. There are a lot of time when you can just use an Excel spreadsheet. I think in terms of sort of land registry data, voting data, transactions, internal transactions on a supply chain, I think, you know, all of these things are going to, yeah, I think Walmart committed to moving their supply chain to a blockchain. So I think all of these are going to happen. It's just a question of timing and sequencing and making sure that those proofs aren't particularly energy intensive. But yeah, I'm sure there are lots of instances where it's not the right case to use blockchain. And actually the World Economic Forum, who we worked on this with this report, put out a report about specifically that, saying is blockchain the answer to your question. So feel free to look that up about what they thought on that, which I think was a very good route map of where blockchain was sensible and where it wasn't.
Okay, the next question is from Nicola. Which ethical framework is best for the Tech for Good initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I worry a little bit about a proliferation of those types of initiatives out there. So I do wonder whether, as part of the UN, so I'm linked in with the ITU and the AI for Good conference and sort of events around that. And I do think that there is a need to have a sort of globally agreed framework on this, or at least an OECD agreed framework. So it's not an area of expertise. We've got a responsible AI team. We've got a responsible tech team as well within PwC that, you know, I work with, but they are much closer to these issues in terms of what needs to happen. So yeah, I mean, one to I think get some international coordination on.
Okay, we've got a question from Nicola again. For those who are not connected yet, is the mobile phone the future for personal communication, or is there a more useful device or system?
Good question. I mean, I think yeah, smartphones are here to stay. I think what they look like and how they operate will change over time. Yeah, will Apple or the iOS, or will there be another new thing come in the next couple of years? I can't say. I do wonder how that will develop. Will there be, you know, it's interesting with all of the tech companies, with Facebook in terms of, I think it controls what, 70 or 80% of social media. Google controls about 80% of search. So I think there is a question about the power of the technology firms and whether some of the, you know, there might be calls to do something about, I wouldn't call it necessarily total monopoly, but or natural monopoly either, but just kind of thinking through how their control is. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, a smartphone is just really now just a portal to apps and the internet. So I can't see how that is going to change, because I think apps and the internet are still going to be central. Whether it's the right portal with the right operating system and which apps are the most used, I think could change quite a lot this decade.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for all those responses. We've reached the end of the questions now, so I'm just going to hand back to Dalim.
Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you for handling that Q&A session. But especially, I want to say thank you very much to Ben for your great insights and continuing involvement with all of these wonderful initiatives that we've got. But of course, it's up to us. We have to make these things happen. And I would really like to hear more about how we can continue to do this at future dates. So thank you very much for that, Ben. And to you especially, thank you for attending this session. Thanks for asking the questions. And do stay engaged with the global goals. They're not just global goals, they're our goals as well. Keep looking out for our future events and so on. Our next one is on the 3rd of February, and you'll find details of that on the North London branch website, but also in terms of other emails that come to you from Central and North London branches and so on. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Stay safe, stay well. Let's keep moving the world forward. Goodbye for now.